Welcome to Buttonbird Tutorials. I am Sheshadri, Faculty for Social Science. This session is for 10th grade CBSE, and the lesson we are doing today, dear students, is the second chapter in history, which is nationalism in India. So, what are we planning to study in this chapter? So, let us look at what are all the main components that are there in this chapter. The first one is the introduction. Then this is followed by how the First World War, the Khilafat movement and the non-cooperation movement, this led to the growth of nationalism in India. Because the First World War was one which was happening mainly in Europe, but it had its repercussion on all parts of the world wherever the respective empires were having their colonies also. Now, India was a British colony, so it did have a large effect on our economy as well. So that we will be seeing next. Then for the non-cooperation movement, different segments of the population, they reacted to it in different ways. For example, each one was having their own agenda. For example, people in towns who were a bit more educated, who were more into jobs, they had a different meaning for non-cooperation, and people in the villages, the peasants, the farmers, they had a different meaning for the same non-cooperation movement. So that we will see. And then comes the civil disobedience movement. Okay, so and finally, how the nationalism gave rise to that sense of collective belonging. So this will these are the things that we will be seeing in this chapter. As you have seen, modern nationalism in Europe, what we saw as a rise of nationalism in Europe, this came to be associated with the formation of nation states. It also meant a change in people's understanding of who they were and what defined their identity and sense of belonging, the sense of belonging to one country. This we saw how it happened in Europe. New symbols and icons, new songs and ideas forged new links and redefined the boundaries of communities, wherein different communities came together to form one country, or where a large country was broken up into parts. Both the things have happened. We have seen that. In most countries, the making of this new national identity was a long process. Now, how did this consciousness emerge in India? In India, as in Vietnam and many other colonies which were ruled by different empires. India was a British colony. Similarly, France had colonies. So, as in many other colonies, the growth of modern nationalism is intimately connected to the anti-colonial movement. So, the idea of rebelling against a foreign power who is dominating the country, that brought together the people. And people began discovering their unity in the process of their struggle with colonialism. The sense of being oppressed under colonialism provided a shared bond that tied many different groups together. We will see that there were a lot of differences between Hindus and Muslims, but it was the feeling of fighting against the British which unified all the sections of the society. We will explore how the Congress sought to develop the national movement, how different social groups participated in the movement, and how nationalism captured the imagination of people. Now, in your earlier textbook, you have read about the growth of nationalism in India up to the first decade of the 20th century. Now, here what we are looking at is the time when actually Mahatma Gandhi came into the picture. That is he returned in 1915 from South Africa. So this chapter looks at the events that led to the growth of nationalism from that point onwards. That is the after the first decade of the 20th century. That is where we will be looking at it in this chapter. Now, the Congress under Mahatma Gandhi tried to forge different groups that were together, that were separated, the Hindus and the Muslims. He forged these groups together within one movement, but unity did not emerge without conflict. There were conflicts. Even the Congress opposed it, and they had to sort it out at the Congress session. But each class and group felt the effects of colonialism differently. Their experiences were varied, and their notions of freedom were not always the same. If he was a trader, he would have a different expectation. If he was a working professional, if he was educated and employed somewhere, he will have a different expectation. If he is an industrialist trying to have a handloom industry, he will have a different expectation. So that is how the expectations were different. Now, in this chapter, we will pick up the story from the 1920s and study the non-cooperation movement and the civil disobedience movement. Now, this is a photograph that's there in the textbook also. This is dated 6th of April 1919 in one of the North Indian cities here, because we can see all the boards. It says Ram Bharosa Hindu Hotel. Okay. So mass processions on the streets became a common feature during the national movement. So this kind of rising of the entire country was never seen before. That's only it started in the late 19th century and in the beginning of the 20th century is when this whole movement gained momentum. Now, we will see the first point where how the First World War affected our country and how it also gave way for rise of nationalism. And towards the end, we will see how Khilafat and non-cooperation movement were used by Mahatma Gandhi to merge the different groups in the society. Now, in the years after 1919, we see the national movement spreading to new areas, incorporating new social groups and developing new modes of struggle. So how do we understand these developments? What implications did they have? First of all, the war created a new economic and political situation. We're referring to the First World War. What happened in the war? What happened because of the war? It led to a huge increase in defense expenditure which was financed by war loans and increasing taxes. Men have to be moved, material has to be moved, they have to be given rations, stock, ammunition, everything. All this costs. Any war is costly. Goes without saying. It is a very expensive exercise. Any war, which was also the case with the First World War. So customs duty. So where does the government suddenly make money? So customs duties were raised and income tax introduced. Through the war years, prices increased, doubling between 1913 and 1918. 1914 to 1918 is the World War actually. So it is the same period, and this was leading to extreme hardship for the common people. Like they say, everything is fair in war and love. They say that as a saying. So this, though the government knows, any government that is unnecessarily raising prices or which is indiscriminately raising prices, they know that the common man will be put into hardship. But they also have no option because the war has to be financed. So this was one of the effects the war had. Next, villages were called upon to supply soldiers, and the forced recruitment in rural areas caused widespread anger. One, maybe they were not willing to go into the armed forces itself. Second, please remember our earlier culture where crossing the ocean or crossing a water body was taboo for Hindus. So this involved that also. So that's why there was widespread anger. That's why they say mainly from the rural areas, because the culture prevented people from crossing a ocean or crossing a huge river or a water body outside the border of the country in which we live. So then in 18, 19 and 2021, crops failed in many parts of India, resulting in acute shortages of food. Dear students, please remember those days. What we now have as a buffer stock, we have a buffer stock of at least the Food Corporation of India was then not there. The FCI now will definitely have stocks for at least 2 years. And total food grain requirement of the entire country, that much will be stocked. But those days that was not the case. First of all, we were treated like we were an agricultural colony of the British. So all the extra, the surplus that was there always was getting exported, and any uncalled for or unplanned shortage that came, that or any crop failure, that resulted in a huge shortage of food. This was accompanied by an influenza epidemic. As you can see now, what we have today is also a pandemic, the corona pandemic, but the healthcare system now is very much in control. In those days, the kind of healthcare system that we have now, the kind of facilities we have now, the kind of testing methods that we have, the kind of the strength of the medical community itself, what we have now was non-existent at that point of time. So according to the census of 1921, 12 to 13 million people perished as a result of famines and the epidemic. People hoped that their hardships would end after the war was over, but that did not happen. So at this stage, a new leader appeared and suggested a new mode of struggle. That's where we have Mahatma Gandhi enter the scene in India when he came from South Africa. Now, these are two photographs here. One of the World War, India and the First World War, where there were Indian soldiers in the field, and the crop failure that was there at that time. These are two photographs of that. So it was Mahatma Gandhi who brought this idea of satyagraha. This was something Perhaps other than South Africa, which had briefly seen him do the revolution or rebellion against the whites there. Perhaps nowhere in the world this concept of a non-violent protest was seen. So this was the first time. So Mahatma Gandhi returned to India in January 1915. As you know, he had come from South Africa where he had successfully fought the racist regime with a novel method of mass agitation which he called Satyagraha. The world itself, for the entire world, this non-violent method of agitation was never seen. Everywhere till this point of time in history, if at all independence was got, or if at all there was rebellion against a particular regime, it was always by use of force. So without force, this was the first time. The idea of Satyagraha emphasized the power of truth and the need to search for truth. That's why the word Satya. Okay, the truth, the meaning of truth in Hindi is Satya. Even in Kannada, for that matter. It suggested that if the cause was true, if the struggle was against injustice, then physical force was not necessary to fight the oppressor. Without seeking vengeance or being aggressive, the Satyagrahi could win the battle through non-violence. This concept itself was new to the entire world. Even the Britishers were taken by surprise because any of the procession there, none of the people were armed. Of course, having firearms was out of question because already there was a licensing system in place. Even other than firearms also, the processions or the demonstrations that happened, they never carried any arms with them. So that was the most distinguishing point in this. The idea of Satyagraha. This could be done by appealing to the conscience of the oppressor. People, including the oppressors, had to be persuaded to see the truth instead of being forced to accept truth through the use of violence. Dear students, we have seen even the early nationalists, they were also of the opinion that even the British, they will listen to what is common sense. They will see that the injustice. So the concept was there from the beginning, but something that was to be done without any violence. Now, by this struggle, truth was bound to ultimately triumph. Mahatma Gandhi believed that this dharma of non-violence would unite all Indians. Even I am of that particular feeling that perhaps this method was the best method that was suited for our country at that point of time, because of course there were people like Subhash Chandra Bose who never agreed to this and who went on for an armed struggle. But the kind of a situation that we were in at that point of time in history, definitely what Gandhiji believed seems to be the best solution then. Now, after arriving in India, Mahatma Gandhi successfully organized Satyagraha movements in various places. In 1916, he traveled to Champaran in Bihar to inspire the peasants to struggle against the oppressive plantation system, where wages were not paid and where they were forced to do indentured labor. No proper salaries at all were given, and that is why the struggle there was to be done. So he organized, and we need to note that these initial campaigns were quite successful at that point. Then in 1917, he organized the Satyagraha to support the peasants of the Kheda district of Gujarat, affected by crop failure and a plague epidemic. The peasants of Kheda could not pay the revenue and were demanding that revenue collection be relaxed. Kheda is the place where Anand, where Amul is there, the headquarters of Amul, or the headquarters of the National Dairy Development Board, which is responsible for the milk revolution in this country. So that is the district of Kheda. So there he again organized this satyagraha. In 1918, Mahatma Gandhi went to Ahmedabad to organize a satyagraha movement among cotton mill workers. So all the while, everywhere he insisted on the demonstrations being peaceful, with only people voicing concern of what is it that they want to be changed. This is a photograph of Indian workers in South Africa, marching through Wolkhurst, 6th November 1913. Mahatma Gandhi was leading the workers from Newcastle to Transvaal. When the marchers were stopped and Gandhiji arrested, thousands of more workers joined the satyagraha against racist laws that denied rights to non-whites. Of course, the struggle in South Africa took much longer, which was again later carried forward. You see, the whites there were only 10%. The remaining 90% of the population was black. And all the 90% of the population had no representation at all in running of the country, either in politics or in any administrative position. So apartheid, and that's why the whole world had condemned South Africa till the removal of apartheid much later. So this is where Gandhiji first started the Satyagraha movement. So what were his thoughts on Satyagraha? What is it? He felt very strongly about it. Dear students, we have to remember Mahatma Gandhi, or his original name Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. He was a distinguished lawyer, and if you see what the photographs we see in his freedom struggle is where he's wearing a dhoti and a shawl, cotton shawl on top. But he dressed like earlier, before he took up the Satyagraha, when he was practicing law, he was dressed as in any other European clothes. So he made a conscious choice of what is correct for the country by doing what he did. So he had seen the world from a normal person or a normal successful professional's point of view, but only when he saw the injustice that was going on, this idea came up to him. It is said of passive resistance that it is the weapon of the weak, but the power which is the subject of this article can only be used by the strong. Because even if you are in a demonstration, even if the government is not listening and you have to continue, this needs strength. So this power is not passive resistance, indeed it calls for intense activity. And he goes on to say the movement in South Africa was not passive but active. Satyagraha is not physical force. The Satyagrahi does not inflict pain on the adversary. He does not seek his destruction. In the use of Satyagraha, there is no ill will, whatever. So we are only protesting against what is wrong with us. But in doing so, the adversary or the person to whom the thing is being addressed to, he is never harmed. So that was the basic fundamental difference there. Non-violence. So that's what he said. Satyagraha is pure soul force. Truth is the very substance of the soul. That is why this force is called Satyagraha. From the first war of independence of 1857 to the present point of time, and even from the time when the Britishers came for trading as East India Company, we could see the kind of devastation that had happened in the country. So that was the truth. That truth was to be told to them. And he says the soul is informed with knowledge. So that knowledge is what he is talking of. In it burns the flame of love. Non-violence is the supreme dharma. And he also notes why it is more relevant to the Indian condition. It is certain that India cannot rival Britain or Europe in force of arms. He's openly accepting it. The British worship the war god, and they can all of them become, as they are becoming, bearer of arms. The hundreds of millions in India can never carry arms. They have made religion of non-violence their own. Dear students, this is a very good thing that has happened in this country, which I can also vouch for. I cannot imagine India or Indians having firearms the way people in modern day United States have. There would be mayhem. It would become chaos. It would become impossible to live in this country. If the kind of firearms that is there in the United States, of course, there is a huge gun lobby there and things like that. But it is a very good thing that this carrying of, even now, if you as a citizen want to carry a firearm, it's a very big process. You have to have a valid reason, and you will be probed for 2-3 years before you are given a license. So he said they have made religion a non-violence of their own. Now, at that point of time, in 1990, is where the Rowlatt Act was proposed by the British. Gandhiji already in 1916, 17 and 18 had done those movements in different places. So emboldened with this success, Gandhiji in 1919 decided to launch a nationwide satyagraha against the proposed Rowlatt Act of 1919. This act had been hurriedly passed through the Imperial Legislative Council despite the united opposition of the Indian members. Now, what was the Rowlatt Act saying? It gave the government enormous powers to repress political activities and allowed detention of political prisoners without trial for 2 years. Similar to emergency. It's like emergency. You can straight away arrest a person on charges of for political reasons and jail him for 2 years without any trial. So straight away the punishment is given. So it was very repressive. So it was against this that he first started a mass movement. Mahatma Gandhi wanted non-violent civil disobedience against such unjust laws, which would start with a hartal on 6th of April in 1919. Hartal is strike. The Hindi word for strike is hartal. Now, based on his call, rallies were organized in various cities. Workers went on strike in railway workshops and shops closed down. Alarmed by the popular upsurge and scared that lines of communication such as the railways and telegraph would be disrupted, the British administration decided to clamp down on nationalists. Now, even the British had not seen such a large movement, though it happened mainly in towns and cities. It was not there in the countryside, not there in the rural areas. So all this happened in the towns and cities. The British were totally caught unawares, and they decided to come down very heavily. Local leaders were picked up from Amritsar, and Mahatma Gandhi was barred from entering Delhi. On 10th April, the police in Amritsar fired upon a peaceful procession, provoking widespread attacks on banks, post offices and railway stations. Dear students, we have to remember how much ever we try to restrain ourselves. If there is no, if the crowd is unarmed and if there is police firing happening on a peaceful procession, definitely it is human nature So that's why when they were fired upon these positions, that provoked widespread attacks on all government installations, banks and this. And at that point of time, they introduced martial law. That is the military will take over. Like it is like saying president's rule, something similar to that. So martial law was imposed and General Dyer took command in Punjab, in Amritsar. And on April the 13th, that is 13th of April, the infamous Jallianwala Bagh incident took place. That was in Amritsar. Now on that day, a large crowd gathered in the enclosed ground of Jallianwala Bagh. Some came to protest against the government's new repressive measures, just like the entire civil disobedience movement was gathering steam, and others had come to attend the annual Vaisakhi fair. It's a local festival in Punjab, the spring festival actually. Now, being from outside the city, many villagers were unaware of the martial law that had been imposed. At that point of time, nowadays, a system of voluntary lockdown by us, how we are easily following the same, and a curfew, it's very common. But in those days, people were not still used to those kind of things. So many villagers were unaware of the martial law that had been imposed. So this person, General Dyer, he entered the area. He blocked all the exit points. It was an enclosed area, and opened fire on the crowd, killing hundreds. He was later punished for it. He was tried. I think he was either executed or he was punished. He was court-martialed for what he did. Now, he knew that the crowd did not have any place to go, but he deliberately did it. And we can see what is it that he wanted. His object, as he declared later, was to produce a moral effect, to create in the minds of satyagrahis a feeling of terror and like the government forces itself acting like terrorists. That is what they did. The military, they have acted just like terrorists will open, just like that they will open fire on any crowd, any crowded area, like terrorist strike. Similar thing it was to terrorize the people. As the news of Jallianwala Bagh spread, crowds took to the streets in many North Indian towns, because this enraged people all over the country. This injustice. Now these are some pictures. This is the Jallianwala Bagh photograph here, where on the brick walls you can see those holes, which are actually the bullet marks which were left behind at that time. This is a photograph of that time. This is the infamous General Dyer, the guy who opens fire. And one more, this is a painting of, you can see how the crowds are running, and the military firing indiscriminately. All of them were unarmed. They had nowhere to go, and they all were eventually to die in the police firing. So these are those photographs there. So we are almost at the end of this session with this. There were strikes, clashes with the police, and attacks on government buildings. The government responded with brutal repression, seeking to humiliate and terrorize people. Satyagrahis were forced to rub their noses on the ground crawl on the streets indiscriminately. They will see any satyagrahi. Generally, maybe they wore only plain white clothes, so they were easily identifiable. So they will see them, catch them, and ask them to crawl on the ground or rub their nose on the ground. Totally inhuman acts, but it was done. They wanted to bring in that feeling of terror in people. The government itself has wanted to terrorize people. Crawl on the streets and do salam to all sahibs. Sahibs at those point of time, any white man, Britisher would be called a sahib. People were flogged, and villages around and villages were born around Gujranwala in Punjab, now in Pakistan. So this is how it peaked. The resistance against the Rowlatt Act and leading to the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. Now, seeing violence spread, Mahatma Gandhi called off the movement. That is one thing Gandhiji has done. When violence goes out of, because he was against violence, non-violence was something which he always stood by it till the end. And we know, unfortunately, he also had to die in that same violence where he gets assassinated. So while the Rowlatt Satyagraha had been a widespread movement, it was still limited mostly to cities and towns. Now Mahatma Gandhi now felt the need to launch a more broad-based movement in India. Because the population then and even now, then maybe it was 80% or 85% of the population was in the villages. Now, he took up this good strategy to do it, but he was certain that no such movement could be organized without bringing the Hindus and Muslims together. One way of doing this, he felt, was to take up the Khilafat issue. So this where the link comes to the end of the First World War, the Khilafat issue and non-cooperation. Now the First World War had ended with the defeat of Ottoman Turkey. The Ottoman Empire was the head of the Islamic world at that point of time, and there were rumors that a harsh peace treaty was going to be imposed on the Ottoman Emperor, known as the Khalifa. So the spiritual head of the Islamic world, he would be asked to pay heavily as war costs, like was done in all other wars. At any war, this war cost was always imposed on the fellow who lost it. Ottoman Turks lost in the First World War, and there were these rumors that they will have to pay very badly for that. Now, to defend the Khalifa's temporal powers, the Khilafat Committee was formed in Bombay in March 1919. A young generation of Muslim leaders like the brothers Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali began discussing with Mahatma Gandhi about the possibility of a united mass action on the issue. Now, this is what Gandhiji saw at that point of time a very ideal time to unite the warring Hindu and Muslim groups. That caste discrimination was very much there. So Gandhiji saw this as an opportunity to bring Muslims under the umbrella of a unified national movement. At the Calcutta session and the Congress, they opposed it. They said, why should we take up the Muslim movement? But then he said, it will be a movement in support of Khilafat as well as for independence, Swaraj. So, at the Calcutta session of the Congress in September 1920, he convinced other leaders of the need to start a non-cooperation movement in support of Khilafat as well as for Swaraj. So, with this, we are at the end of this session. We will take up this lesson in the next session. There is one picture here, photograph. General Dyer's calling orders being administered by British soldiers Amritsar. Same. In around the time of the Jallianwala Bagh incident, you can see a person crawling on the ground and the soldiers there making them do it. So this was the situation then. So any doubts, please contact us on these numbers, or you can send a message in the Butt and Butt Tutorials mobile app chat section. Thank you.